There are many great parts to my dad's life, but we're going to focus right now just on the making of this Getz Gilberto. And before I get into that, I just really want to thank Quintessence for hosting. The sound is incredible in this room, and I think you'll see that shortly. And also,
Nick wants a pair of speakers.
yeah, I want that turntable.
He wants a turntable. That's it. He wants
Can
a
anyone help me
turntable.
steal it? We need about 20 people to carry that out here.
I deliver to LA.
Okay. Good. I'll just do it on layaway because I don't think I can. It's like having a Ferrari or something.
It is a Ferrari.
And I want to thank A.B. Fon and Impact's Record. Our family is very, very finicky on who we work with. And my dad was all about excellence. And we want to make sure that when we do something, we do it right and we honor him properly. And we're very, very proud of the work that A.B. has done with this. And I think you'll really, really appreciate, see a difference, even though it's been reissued many times, with the bonus tracks. My mother's writing the liner notes at the time. Family photographs, you get to see me, just kidding. But if you're interested in that, but I think you'll enjoy it. I want to start by going back. Getz Gilberto was won the Album of the Year and the Song of the Year in the Grammys in the pop category, not in the jazz category, in the pop category, and that's only been done one other time. Herbie Hancock did that in 1998, but my dad did it in a year that his competition was the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and Barbra Streisand and Louis Armstrong. So these are real heavyweights. This isn't Taylor Swift and Britney Spears. This is yeah. So it's quite an accomplishment that we're very proud of. And I'm going to take you back just to the beginning of the bossa nova and how it all came about. My parents were living in Copenhagen. A lot of the jazz musicians. They're very famous in America and loved, but people were getting a little sick of their act with getting in trouble with the law, with smoking grass and acting crazy. So a lot of them lived in Amsterdam and in London and in Paris and in Copenhagen. They could sort of get away with their shenanigans in Europe, and many of them were there at that time, including Miles and some of the others. And my dad was all of a sudden not relevant anymore. Suddenly wasn't selling albums, he wasn't being booked for concerts, and he had 4 children and my mother, and wanted to provide for the family, and he said, we got to get back to the mecca of the jazz universe, which is New York City. So he got us all back to New York, and his very first performance was at a venue that he'd never not sold out. It was the Village Vanguard. He'd never not sold it out, and he was expecting the same treatment, but he was very, very disappointed because he had 2 sets to play that evening, and after the first set, he went across the street and he said to his friend Miles Davis, who was playing at a different jazz venue, he said, Miles, what's going on? These people are talking during my performance. I didn't sell out. What has happened? He goes, Stan, the music has changed. You got to play this really fast, improvisational, sort of new avant-garde way of playing where you do 10-minute solos and you show off your skills at all the ranges. And it's a very complicated kind of jazz, and I'm sure that I will enjoy that and understand that when I'm older, but at the moment I still haven't. I like a jazz that is harmonic, and I'm very, of course, partial to my dad, but he didn't want to play the current trend, and so he made a series of choices to be true to himself and to not sell out. And he was facing a lot of pressure from the record label as well. They said, you need to make, play the current trend, or make rock and roll, get on some rock and roll records or something. And he was like, what? So he decided his very first thing he thought that would bring him back and make his concerts sell out and all that was, there was a guy from the late 40s when he was in the big bands called Eddie Sauter. And Eddie was a really, really talented composer. And Eddie, he thought it was a crime that Eddie was reduced to just making jingles for commercials, like the 2.5 Men character. He was just making silly little things, and he was such a brilliant man. And so my dad commissioned him to sort of create this masterpiece of an album, which is my favorite my dad's favorite album, the only one that he ever really liked himself on. He felt there was no flaws in it, and it was called Focus. But after it was released, he would go to the newsstand every day and see where it was in the Billboard ratings, and it just didn't commercially connect and do as well financially as he thought it would. It was more for a niche audience, and it's beautiful music, and if you're a fan of my dad, it's one to own. But it didn't do as well as he wanted. So after that, he ran into a friend of his called Charlie Bird, who had just returned from South America. Charlie said, I've heard this music that swept Brazil and South America. It's called Bossa Nova. Will you listen to it? My dad said, sure, play it. Let's hear it. And my dad, he just thought it was pretty. He did not think it was going to be what it was. And so Charlie said, listen, would you do me a favor? Would you make an album with me? And my dad said, I'm not doing anything else, so sure. They said, but we're going to do it in one day. I said, I live in New York, you live in DC. I'm going to fly down in the morning, and we're going to do it no second takes. I don't like 30 takes of the same song. That's going to make it sound stale. And I don't, so you have your A game on, because I'm sleeping in my own bed at night. So they made this album, Jazz Samba, with Charlie Bird, which is a beautiful, beautiful album, and it swept the Grammys in the jazz category in 1963, 2 years prior to Get Gilberto. It won 5, it swept every single award. And it inspired the record label president to say, what if we got the Yankees together? Let's get the best guy doing this in Brazil, and Stan, who was apparently, he was told, was the inspiration for the Bossa Nova in the beginning. And that's a whole nother story, but he said, let's put them and see how that goes. And a lot of times that works on paper, but in real life, the chemistry is not there. But in this case, it worked beautifully, because João flew up, and he didn't speak a lick of English. My dad couldn't speak Portuguese, but musically they connected beautifully. They communicated just. So they made an album, not in one day, but in a relatively short amount of time, about 12 days. They made Get Gilberto. And I want you to listen to some of the music. What's unique about my father was that he didn't like playing one note too many or one note too few. He wanted to play what's appropriate. So in the song you're going to hear, he doesn't play until halfway through the song. He does this a lot. He plays with restraint, which I think is a refreshing thing in this current day and age. Sometimes less is more, and simplicity is more powerful, and to play without ego and restraint is good. He had a fat head sometimes, but musically, he had restraint, which is, I feel, a wonderful quality that I'm proud that he had. So let's listen to some music, and then I'll talk a little bit more. At the very end, if you have questions, I'm happy to answer all your questions.
So we're going to listen to side A, track 1, Girl from Ipanema, on test pressing, press that RTI on VR900 formula.
So you can see my dad, he walks softly, but he carries a big stick. When he comes in, he does add quite another dimension to the sound, and that's his nickname was actually The Sound, and I think he had a unique sound. He loved Coltrane, and he loved Charlie Parker, and he loved Lester Young was his idol. But my dad had a unique style, and he stayed true to it, and we're very proud of him. I want to also talk about a huge factor in this particular album, especially, why I think it went to another level. My mother was a wonderful woman in her own right. She was a very pretty woman. She was just simply a housewife, but she was much more than that to my father, because she lived in an era that was not the Me Too era. It was the women served the cookies and the coffee to the men, and then listened in from the kitchen. And she would always tell my dad, that guy had a point. That guy was full of shit. We're not going to do it this way. And she directed him and took him to new levels. And she actually was the person who discovered Astrid Gilberto. Astrid was simply a housewife of João, who was a huge, huge star. He was the Frank Sinatra of Brazil. And Astrid would sing in the kitchen when they were cooking with my mom during the making of the album. And when they were looking for somebody to sing the lyrics of Girl from Ipanema in English, my mother spoke up and said, I think Astrid can do it. And João, like an I Love Lucy episode with Lucy wanting to be in the show, he said, absolutely not. She's always trying to get in and she sucks. There's no way. And so my dad calmed him down and said, look, it's only 3 minutes. Worst that'll happen, we'll have a good laugh. Give her a shot. Trusted my mom. And Astrid sings the song in a way that's surprisingly perfect. It's very, I wouldn't say amateurish, but it's simple. It's no bells and whistles. It's no diva Christina Aguilera going off on 17 octaves. It's kind of innocent, and that's why the family's very reluctant to do re-releases of that song, because it's easy to spoil that. But maybe we'll find the right person to do it with, but we can't envision somebody who's too strong of a singer almost to do it. Could spoil it. My mother also, this album, when it was released, well, first of all, it was completed, and the executives at the record company thought the bossa nova craze had passed, and they decided not to release it at all. And my mom knew the value of it, so she actually went behind. It sat for 13 months unreleased. They were never going to release it. But what she did was she went behind their backs and she gave singles to pickers, which worked with DJs. And so they started playing it on all the radio stations. She would just give them these samples. And one by one, it became number one first in St. Louis and in Cleveland and San Francisco, and the dominoes fell. And before you knew it, my mom had forced their hand and made them release it because it was number one. And my mother is going to be 89 next month, and she wrote the liner notes to this. And there's been 3 biographies written on my dad, but there's information in this liner notes that I didn't even know existed of the making of this. And I think it's really exciting for her to be. Her memoirs are also going to be coming out hopefully in about a year or so. She's a great woman in her own right, and was a perfect complement to my dad, who was a unique person. He didn't know how to read music. He was very high IQ, had a photographic memory, but she was balanced in him. He fought demons with alcohol and addiction, and she was just the right balance, and they were a great team for many, many years. Unfortunately, at the end of his life, sort of the demons overcame. She couldn't control that, but I'm producing a documentary that'll be out next year, and I'm hoping you guys are, if you're interested, will put some eyeballs on that and enjoy that. Should we play another song?
Play one more song. So I had the privilege of spending some time with Monica. We went to stay at her house in Shadowbrook.
It's in Irvington, New York, Westchester County. It's called Shadowbrook.
And it's 27 bedrooms, and she lives there by herself and manages the house. That tells you how strong and independent she is. Her memory is still really sharp, and she was giving us all these stories, so we were digging through photos and archive, and I was hoping to find that magic bonus reel. Well, I found no magic bonus reel, but we found a lot of great photos that she was willing to share, and she just gave us just these insights. It's just so, we just cherished every second. And I'm not sure if I can say this, but Monica is not just a very strong and intelligent, independent woman, but she is the daughter of a countess in Sweden. She is true blue blood. Castle, crown, tiara, and all.
And marrying a musician in the 50s was like marrying the tennis pro or the hairdresser.
Monica went to Georgetown. So they made a very interesting a couple, and she's still in the family home. And on the property, Mark Levinson built a studio, and it's still there.
It's still there. Mom still lives in it, and it's a home that was built on the proceeds of this bossa nova era from 60 to 66, and my dad was just so mortified and ashamed of it, because he would have Duke Ellington and Buddy Rich and Dizzy Gillespie come and they'd be like, where did you get this?